partners for the inaugural Freeze Dried Summit. We're thankful to have Lloyd Parks, who's part of Cuddon Freeze Dry. And if you're not familiar with Cuddon Freeze Dry, they're actually been freeze drying for over 60 years. So, a very knowledgeable and educational company coming to the summit. And if you're not able to come to the summit, we have Lloyd here to talk about the company and get you familiar with what everything is happening internationally, because Cudden is actually located and headquartered in New Zealand, of all places. And so they have a lot of international interest. Lloyd is actually here representing the North and South America market. And so, Lloyd, thanks a lot for joining me here. We're going to talk about everything about what you do for Cudden, and also just talk about everything about freeze drying and what you're going to cover at your session at the summit. So, hey, thanks for joining me on this live stream.
No, thanks for that. Thanks for the intro. Yeah, so I've been with Cudden for about 5 years now. I was a customer of theirs a lot longer than that ago, maybe about probably going on 12 years ago now. So my background with freeze drying was I ran a freeze dried operation for pet food, a company called Stella & Chewy's. I was their director of ops and then director of R&D for a while, and that was my intro to Cudden way back then. Since then, I've continued to be involved in food processing, and both human side and the pet food side of things, and freeze drying has gone back and forth. From Cudden standpoint, the one thing, actually, COVID is what brought me into the company because travel was restricted in that time of the world, so around the world. So we had always been in touch, and they were looking for somebody to kind of be in the U.S. I happened to be here, and in a nutshell, that's kind of how that happened, and it's worked out really well.
Yeah. Now, Stella and Chewy's, I mean, that's a top tier brand. So tell us a little bit about that experience. Like, were you in the actual freeze drying side of things with them, or
Yeah.
just kind of this kind of, and that's kind of what naturally brought you into working for Cudden? Tell us about kind of your pathway and discovery into freeze drying.
So, Stella Chewy's, the short version of that is I was on the other side of the world. I was living in Australia working for VIP Pet Foods. It's Australian pet brands. Now they go by the name of Real Pet Food People, but I was with that firm over there. And same recruiter that had placed me at Natural Balance in California reached out to me and talked to me about Stella Chewy's. Said, "Look, I'm on the other side of the world. Thanks, but no thanks." They told me, talk to him first. Forwarding a little bit, the CEO at the time, I agreed to talk to him. Said, "Look, don't say no to it until you've seen the place." And I came to see Stella Chewy's. They were at their first facility. They only had 5 small freeze dryers at the time, and looking at all processing, I was like, well, processing's not different, packaging's not different, grinding's not different. The freeze dryers, I was like, well, that's different. I haven't done that before. So basically, before I came back to Australia, they told me, what's it going to take? And I jokingly said, well, the dog's non-negotiable. The dog's coming with me. And they actually wrote the dog into an offer, and I said, okay, this has got to be the place. So packed my stuff, brought my dog back with me, and moved to Milwaukee, which was not part of my vocabulary. But yes, it was specifically freeze drying. A good chunk of what I did was the operations part reported to me, as did maintenance, as did QA. So I was, the director of ops, formulations, equipment selection, and a good chunk of the R&D of what came that originated with me. I installed freeze dryer number 6 when I was with them. I left the company at 24 freeze dryers in their current facility, and they've continued to grow since. So it was certainly a good fun experience, and that was my introduction. About 5 and some change years worth of freeze drying.
Yeah. Now, some of these large companies that have been around for a long time doing freeze dry products, like for example, Mountain House with Oregon Freeze Dry, they built their own custom freeze dryers. Did Stella and Chewy's build their own freeze dryers, or did they use?
We
Uh,
did.
yeah. Or
Yeah.
what machines do they have?
Yeah, no. So Stella Chewy's, not giving what Stella Chewy's has their own equipment. They had some that was purchased here in the U.S. Some years back. I think some of that they still keep kind of on the secret side of things, but they did build their own based on their needs and what was available at the time. There wasn't freeze drying has continued to get popular, and there are more brands out there now that are certainly available to get things. Back then, there really wasn't. So uh, we I was part of that process. There were local firms, and we said we need this, we need it to do this, and it was based on existing models, but that's still what the case is.
Yeah. Now moving to Cudden. So tell us a little bit about Cudden and how long have you been working there? Why did you choose Cudden as kind of your career path to go with them? Because a lot of people may not be familiar with the company, just because there's a lot of buzz around the brands of these home freeze dryers, things like that in the U.S. that I'm in. But tell us a little bit about Cudden and what makes them unique and why you joined them.
So that was actually it was a pretty easy decision. First, they reached out to me. That was the one thing, and we had talked in several occasions about doing something for Cudden, and helping out in a few different shows and expos that I'd been before, and I had done that. But I was on the operations side of things, on the research and development, and over maintenance, over operations on human side of operations and on pet food. So I didn't really want to leave that behind. What Cudden put on the table was, while my position is a sales position, it kind of falls under the technical sales and side of things, and they wanted somebody with expertise um, in the food processing, what happens before freeze drying, what happens after, kill steps involved, because we build equipment, and Cudden does a very good job of doing that. But it's what you put into the freeze dryer also affects what comes out of it. So that was something that Cudden didn't have at the time. They were very good on the engineering side of things, but the reason we kept crossing paths is because we have a customer that wants to know about this process in freeze drying, and this process in kill step, and this process in meat, and this process in fruit. And I did that for 25 years. So that's where the crossover came. Second is, I had my experience with freeze drying machines, that were of a certain design, and I found Cudden to be a lot better. I found I like that they used liquid shelves. I like that the heat distribution was everything a person in QA wants. And kind of going back to that, my background started in quality assurance, so I started with what you're not supposed to do. Then I merged into the dark side of operations, and then R&D, which was my happy place. But the good thing about starting in QA is you know what you can't get away with, you know what you're supposed to do from a sanitation standpoint, from a micro standpoint, and a quality assurance standpoint. Operations sometimes just wants to push product through, which is understandable because that's what produces and that's what makes money. But there is a quality assurance standpoint and a biosecurity standpoint that has to be looked at and has to be met as well. Usually QA is, they're the bad guys in the plant telling everybody, no, you can't do this. And there's a reason why. And Cudden met what I wanted to see in pieces of equipment, just like other food processing equipment for meat specifically. The stuff is fully wash downable, meaning you can take it to a chemical pressure washer and all that on the inside. So it's built to the dairy industry standard. You can make baby food off of this, and some of our customers do. If you can make baby food, it doesn't get any more stringent than that. So that's all those things kind of tick boxes of, can I sleep at night with what? Can I stand behind it? And yeah, that was bottom line with that.
Yeah, I think when I hear QA, just from a smaller boutique business owner, is your QA to me says basically I know that something is dried, or I know something is able to be cleaned so that I can do various different products. Correct?
Correct. And there's things to be considered. It's not just the way the product looks, the way the product tastes. I mean, there's pathogens of concern. And when you're talking pet food or treats or human consumption stuff, they are pathogens of concern. That's Listeria, Salmonella, E. coli. These are things that are heavily taken into consideration when you're in a USDA or an FDA facility, or even if it's just your local Department of Agriculture overseeing a facility. There is an artisanal level, which is like your farmers market and stuff, and they do have to follow the same guidelines, although not as strict as. But once you start growing into that wider audience and you start shipping stuff over state lines or even over county lines, then you really have to start meeting sanitation standard operating procedures, and you have to have, and then you're subject to audits of, third party audits, which want to make sure that there is a food safety aspect to what you're doing. And all of that may not seem related at all into the mechanical, put the product here, put it in a freeze dryer, dice it, put it in a package. You're thinking that's common sense, that you can see that. It's the stuff you don't see, that grows underneath biofilm that doesn't get clean, and you missed it, and all of a sudden you hear recalls on the news about, oh, certain pet food or certain product or certain treats got taken off because of a listeria outbreak. Something got missed. And it's easy to miss something when you have nooks and crannies that can't get cleaned. And that's kind of what one of the things I was attracted to about Cudden, that the equipment is cleanable, and then there's the possibility of reduction and kill step inside of the chamber as well. So that's from a QA standpoint, it's about as good as it gets.
Yeah, let me ask you a little bit about. Yeah, I'm curious about what your thoughts are with this surge of people getting into freeze drying because of the fact that Harvest Right developed a home freeze dryer for kind of the everyday homeowner. Yes, it's it's several thousands of dollars, but at the same time, you're dealing with very large equipment that are is out of reach financially for most people. So the fact that they came out with a home freeze dryer and it kind of brought this new innovative kind of like small business pathway for people to get into this new food process. What's your thoughts on how things have progressed over the past, I would say, 5 years, and maybe give us your thoughts on what's good and bad of coming that's coming out of that.
Well, I don't think there's anything bad coming out of it. I think there's a place for every type of freeze dry manufacturer out there. Harvest Right plays a very key role in that. They are entry level for most people. And even at entry level, I mean, it's still a few $1,000s. I mean, it's not like just buying a couple $100 piece of equipment.
Yep.
It falls kind of like an appliance level type of equipment as far as cost. But the good thing about them is that they are introducing and educating a lot of people on freeze drying. A lot of people didn't know what it was 15 years ago. There wasn't anybody who knew about freeze drying. You say, "What is that? Is it dehydrated?" You're like, "No, it's not dehydrated. It is, but it isn't." You have to explain. And now you talk to somebody. I just opened a lab right here in Milwaukee to do samples for people. And the guy who runs the building and the research center, he goes, "Oh yeah, I got a Harvest Right, and I have one at home. I do this, and I do meats, and I do sauces, and I take it for camping." So people know what freeze drying is now. So that is pretty much a thanks to Harvest Right. Not alone them, but on a great part due to them. So that there is a lot of good stuff that come to them. People start doing the research. And as far as bad, I'm not going to say bad, but maybe a limitation is when people think they can go to commercial levels of production on Harvest Right. You hear people says, "Oh yeah, I've got 10 of them in a plant." You're like, "Wow, that's a big number." But then it's not the amount of maintenance and care that goes into them is different than you would have in a true commercial unit, which is built from stainless and just built for 30 years of use plus. So that's the limitation there. But as far as an intro point, somebody proof of concept at an affordable level and just getting your feet off the ground, Harvest Right plays a very good role.
Yeah, I think I would agree hands down. I think I mean, that's how I was able to get into it. It was more of kind of a necessity in terms of like I have that entrepreneur spirit where I was looking for some type of side hustle. It then morphed into uh, fortunately for me and my business here in Boise, it kind of morphed into me being a kind of a first mover in my market here. So I was kind of the only freeze dried brand. I kind of gained a lot of success and sales from that. As I kind of went through it, I realized that there's so much more for me to learn about different ways that the freeze dryer operates. And then I started this YouTube channel and come to find yourself and other commercial freeze drying companies. And it's like, wow, like, there's an actual skill set in knowing how a freeze dryer operates and how it can manipulate different types of food items, non-food items to get a result that can be relatively new to a whole new base of people. So I think it's a phenomenal technology that kind of is easy to push a button on a home freeze dryer, but then you can get a lot more technical with machines like Cudden be able to do. Like you mentioned, breast milk, dairy, pet food, raw food, all that type of stuff. It's really fascinating.
No, you're right. There's a wide range. There's some products that are more robust, like meat, some fruits and vegetables. It's pretty much you set a recipe and you press play. And yeah, you can certainly set a recipe similar to a harvest right. It's almost just press play, but you can program a little bit more. And then if you really need to get into the expensive stuff like some of the probiotics or lactoferrin or some of the live organisms that cost about $1,500 a pound, or you know, people don't want to waste an ounce of that. Then you get into those 36 plus hour cycles that are very delicate. They're plus minus 1 degree all the way through, and they want to make sure they get the bioactivity off of those products. Plus, they don't want to waste an ounce off of it. So those are things that you can do only on commercial units. I know for a fact specifically on ours because of the liquid filled shelves. But those are things you learn along the way. Yeah, sure, you can freeze something in a harvest right and press play, but then the more elaborate you get, and as you grow, you realize, okay, I need more capability.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about these, like you mentioned liquid shelving units. So what does that even mean for the layman person?
Yep.
Uh, somebody who's used to a home freeze dryer. Most people who are watching this are kind of coming from that atmosphere. There's definitely people that watch this channel for larger businesses, but for that layman person who doesn't know what that means and what difference it makes, tell us about that.
Okay, so most freeze dryers, from entry level even into the mid range of commercial levels, they have electric heated shelves. So they have some sort of either heating pad or some sort of uh, wiring that heats the plate where the product sits on. So that type of element is the best description I can give you is like when you ever look inside of a toaster and you see that little element running through there. Part of it's glowing really bright red, some of it's not glowing at all. So there's clearly a difference in temperature in that. For most products, not a big deal. That's probably okay. When a product gets real expensive and really specific and they want very uniform temperature, that's not going to work as well. So where the liquid shelves come in, basically the best way to describe it and give you a visual for it is our shelves are basically one big rectangular pipe where liquid is flowing through. So it starts in the front and it starts S-ing its way all the way through the product. So it starts on one end, comes out the other, and we do have a heating element heating the liquid, the fluid that runs through it, and depends on the size of the unit. It could be glycol or Temper 55 or one of the HTF fluids that run through it. But think of it like a radiator in a car. It is running through a jacketed system. It's running through the product, and that's what heats your product. Some of the advantages there is that in an electric unit, while it shouldn't happen, in the case of a short circuit, it can, is temperature can start running away. And it has happened to me in the past where you can burn product with electric shelves. With liquid, you cannot, because there is a maximum temperature that liquid can get to, how much it can transfer, and it is a more delicate and more uniform form of heat distribution. It's just also kind of like, where do you feel the heat most? Running it through like your hand through a dry section of air, or if you dipped it in the same temperature water. The water is clearly going to cover that temperature a lot better. Those are just visuals to give you, but the biggest difference is they operate the same way. Both freeze dryers, electric and ours, they have the same concept. It's vacuum, then you add heat, and that helps the moisture flash off and then sublimate into the ice trap. That part's the same. The difference is how that heat is distributed. We have conductive heat from the plate that is in contact, where the trays are in contact with the shelf, and that's in contact with the product. And then there's also radiant heat between tray and shelf.
Now, does the liquid type that type of heating mechanism, does that matter for certain types of applications in food, or is it a blanketed like this is good for everything?
It's pretty much good for everything because it may be overkill for some things. So if you're going to do something like, and I'm talking only from the aspect of getting the product done. So if you're going to run, let's say maybe candy, it may be overkill. The electric units are good enough and they're fine, and you don't need to go to that level of over-engineered piece of equipment. But yes, it can do it, and it can do it well. The advantage comes into It can do very delicate product as well, further than any other type of product, than any other type of freeze dryer. And the other biggest advantage is the equipment's washable. You can take a pressure washer to it, you can acid wash it, you can caustic wash it, you can put quad in it. Anything a quality assurance or person or an auditor wants to see you do, or a government agent wants to see you perform on equipment, can be done on the inside. I mean, our equipment can be flooded if you wanted to, and then drained, completely sanitized and sterilized if that's what you want to do. That's a little bit harder to do on the other units because they require, while the more industrial you get, the more robust the equipment is, they do require wipe down, and there's a limit to how much you can get chemicals and water in there. And you can be rough on the equipment. It's stainless all the way through. It's not something that you're going to short circuit because there is no moving parts inside of our units. So that's
Yeah.
the difference.
What type of target market does Cudden primarily focus on? Because we do have a lot of up and coming people, especially at the summit. There's going to be a good chunk of people that are exploring what a freeze drying opportunity in business looks like. And there's other people that have an existing business who are they have maybe some opportunities and they're looking to advance production. But like, where does Cudden kind of fit into the realm of the different stages of freeze drying businesses today?
So for the most part, and for years, we've been focusing on our, the medium to larger manufacturers that have graduated from small, that maybe they started on a harvest right, and then they start graduating onto the next size unit, first full size commercial unit. That's kind of where we are. However, we used to build small units. I have a 5.5 kilo unit in my lab that I just put. However, that unit is 10 years old. We bought it back from a client that was moving back to Europe. And unfortunately, we don't make that size anymore, but we did go down to make a 50 kilo machine just out of demand because we saw a lot of people asking, what do you have for small unit? What do you have for an R&D size unit? Which can I use for both? And our smallest till about 6 months ago was a 100 kilo unit, but now we are making a 50. And that does come down to demand. As far as product type, it really is all over the board. We have people in seaweed, nutraceutical, pharmaceutical, the dairy industry, pet food, and then just treats, meals, just snacks. It really is all over the board.
Lloyd, I've always wondered this, and you're probably the right person to ask, but pharmaceutical, they say, is a huge application in freeze drying. Why is that? What are you using a freeze dryer for pharmaceutical purposes?
Well, the COVID vaccines, those were freeze dried. That powder that they had to rehydrate and keep cold, that was a freeze dried process. A lot of vaccines, a lot of live organisms that you want to keep, they are very heat sensitive, so they do not take any type of heat whatsoever. So they would have to be freeze dried at a very low temperatures, which we do make a LT version as well. And it mostly has to do with high value, heat sensitive product. It's in a completely different realm than meats, treats, fruits, and vegetables. Those things are pretty robust. And if you get the formula or the recipe wrong, worst case scenario is you get a product that maybe doesn't look as pretty, but it's still functional. Whereas in pharmaceutical, if you get it wrong, batch worth thousands, if not millions, can be damaged. So that's pretty much the difference on that.
I'm not a scientist, or a chemist, but basically, am I getting this right? That with a vaccine, it starts out as like a mixture that is more in a liquid based, and they need to freeze it at a very cold temperature, and then you dry it so that you can put it in a powder form to then you distribute out to everybody that then they reconstitute. How does that all work? I'm not understanding.
Some of them, yes. Some of them start in liquid, then you can freeze them in the freeze dryer. Most actually go through an IQF type of process where they fast freeze dry or blast freeze dry the product into pellets. And the best visual I can give you there is Dippin' Dots ice cream. You know how those tiny little balls look like pellets? They go through some sort of equipment prior to freeze drying that makes these pellets or makes the granules and then those things either go in trays or in vials or in whatever final container is going to be, and then that goes into the freeze dryer, and then that goes in through the freeze drying process. So a little more elaborate, a little more delicate than you're like, hey, I filled a tray with slurry. Um, Same concept as far as once you press play, the physics of it is the same. That still happens. It's just what happens on the front end, and how cold does the equipment need to get, and how the temperature is how the heat distribution happens, and how fast it happens, how aggressive it happens. That plays a difference in what type of equipment you choose.
Yeah. Another question for you. So you're dealing with a lot of different individuals from various companies, different backgrounds of their knowledge of freeze drying. What are most people inside larger companies? Where are they contacting you from? Is it from a QA person that says, "Hey, we're exploring using our wet, SKU product, and we're exploring getting it dried in that form"? Is it coming from R&D? Is it coming from a CEO who says, "I love what I'm seeing with freeze drying, and I want you to explain this more so I can talk to the board"? Who's coming at the table with you?
So it's actually all of the above. Obviously, CEOs and ownerships are usually the people who pull the trigger, and they're the ones who have the fastest movement. Somebody says, "We want to make this product. We've already looked into it. Um, tell me, tell me the bullet points about your product, and I'll tell you in 3 months if we're pulling the trigger or not." Basically, that's what it comes down to when you have that level of player. Then you have another tier, which is the QA folks, which come through, and they have been assigned to go to some of these expos like EATS or IPPE or IFT First, those types of events, and they are looking for what the next best thing is, and plus identifying whatever their challenges are. If it's somebody from corporate level quality assurance, they want to know. It's like, oh well, we're looking at doing quality assurance in our freeze drying area. We're looking at getting into freeze drying. What's the difference? What can I do? Can I do these types? They're exploring to then go report back to a plant. Obviously, a CEO is like, I want to do it, and I want it done yesterday.
Yeah.
Then you have your R&D people, similar to QA. They're exploring what the next deal is and coming up with the next product is, and they kind of lie somewhere in between those two. And then you also have your senior operations people, like, I have a dicing operation and then I have a lot of meat scraps. What can I do with those meat scraps? Can I freeze dry meat scraps? Do I have to do it in a slurry? Can I give it a shape? That's when we start answering. Part, what happens on the front end, then what can you do in the freeze dryer, and what can it look like at the bottom end? And so yeah, it is really all of the above. And then of course there's you have people that come out of just a garage at home, and it's like, I bought a small machine. I'm doing freeze dried candy. I'm ready for the next thing, for the next big unit. And usually you see a lot more of those, but every once in a while, one of them will pull the trigger and they'll go big.
What are your
I mean, if you
thoughts on
think about
free?
it, if you think about Stella
Yeah.
and Chewy's, for example, Marie, which is what was the owner, and she was still sitting CEO till not that long ago. She started out of her apartment in New York, just selling frozen, and then she came up with freeze drying because of a need for shelf stableness, and um, that was no different than somebody exploring those shows and being on that ground level, and all of a sudden it just took off. In 5 years, it turned into what it was.
Yeah, why would somebody want to vertically integrate with like a jump from a home freeze dryer to a commercial industrial freeze dryer versus just sticking with the home units and then going to a co-packer, things like that? Like why are you seeing most people go to the vertical integration, meaning they're keeping the operations in-house?
Actually, it does happen both ways. It's not necessarily one way or the other, and we help people go in both directions. So if somebody wants to have, some companies want to keep control of their process because they strongly believe in what they've built. They want to have control over it. They don't want it to be mixed with somebody else's product. They don't want the chance of cross contamination. They believe in their product where it's like, look, quality control is 100% ours. We don't farm it out, and that's a vision. That's a mission statement. So there is nothing wrong with somebody co-packing for somebody else, or looking for somebody to co-pack for them. As a matter of fact, some of our customers are co-packers, and for us as a manufacturer, I like seeing the individuals take off because that's just close to me from my R&D side of things. But from a sales standpoint, it really doesn't make a difference, because one way or another, you're filling capacity somewhere, and somebody's going to move to the next. Either they're going to purchase another unit and expand their facility, and they're helping somebody grow. But the trend we usually do see is people who have a product and want to do their own thing, they eventually will build their own facility. They start with they start small, then they find a co-packer, and when they get large enough to justify not paying that premium to a co-packer and getting their own equipment and bite the bullet and get their own equipment, they do it. It's usually 1 to 5 year process, and they eventually grow into it. So it grows both ways.
Big question here. Is freeze drying a profitable business?
It is, and it because there's a lot of ways of looking at it. Either you have a very high valued product, like lactoferrin, for example, that is very expensive. Fifteen
What is
hundred
that?
dollars a kilo.
What's lactoferrin?
It is an extract. It's a filtrate off of dairy, and out of like let's say 1,000 gallons, you probably only get a couple gallons worth of this liquid gold that they like calling it. It's a protein extract, and then that little bit gets freeze dried. Obviously, it gets taken, and then that very lightweight pink powder gets sold for infant formulas, and it has the highest quality assurance standards that can't be spray dried. It has to be freeze dried, and that comes from actually from Japan and China, and that's where all that product goes to. So for that, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to have a dairy facility to do that. You have to have the filtration devices to do that, and that is millions of dollars, and it's a whole facility to get dedicated to that. But they're taking advantage of every last ounce of milk that comes out of that facility. They're not wasting anything of it. And then when you're going completely to the other extreme of things, there's nutritional value in a lot of wasted product. Fruits and vegetables that may not look as pretty because they're not going to make it to a shelf. But as far as turning it maybe into a powder or dried slices or something for treats, but a dried powder for smoothies, so to speak, then you're taking something that would have been a B product and then you are turning it into a premium product. So your raw material comes in at a low cost and your outgoing finished good comes out at a premium. So there's high margins on that. The margins on freeze dried product are pretty good. Candy being one of the highest because you take one package and turn it into multiple, and each one of them sells almost for the same price as the original. So there's that. Then there's meats, proteins like your offals from like a slaughter facility. You can take organ meats that don't have a high demand here in this country. Other parts of the world they do have high demand, like Europe and South America, where everything gets consumed in a different way than here. But there is certainly nutritional value for that, and from the human side for protein and encapsulated protein, or for powders to add as a topper for inclusions in pet food, where you take a kibble, which is your lowest tier of pet food, then you add freeze dried to it. All of a sudden, that's premium kibble.
Yep.
You've added to it, and not only that, but it's an extreme palate. And my dog, I've got a little pity mix here in the house, and she'll eat her kibble, but she'll come back to it every once in a while if she didn't finish the bowl. But if I put freeze-dried liver powder on it, she licks that bowl across the hallway and doesn't stop licking it until the thing's got a mirror shine to it. So there's value to it. To answer your question, yeah, freeze drying is extremely profitable. The margins are higher than your traditional protein market. They're higher than your fruit market. The trade-off is you have to bite the bullet and you have to get the equipment in order to do it. Find somebody who has it, or you have to get your own. That's the commitment.
Yep. I agree. I'm going to talk about this at the summit, and I want to get to what you're going to talk about and just kind of what you're excited for at the summit. But one of the things I'm going to be addressing to the general audience is that you know to not fail in freeze drying is to understand why you're getting into freeze drying. So there's nothing wrong with having a side business, just like you would making quilts or making your own homemade salsa and selling it at a farmer's market, getting into a little bit of wholesale, navigating that. But you're going to reach a point with any side hustle that, like, the money to get the work to get that side hustle money is probably not enough for what it's costing you in your time. And so either you're going to continue and you like that pathway, or you're not. For those of you that want to that you would like understanding the freeze drying process, then you go into more full time. And once you get full time, you might have more shifts and employees, and you're going to want to be able to schedule how you're running your product so that you're getting the max efficiency. And the only way to really do that is not necessarily with home freeze dryers because they're meant to just automate the process versus you dictating how you want to schedule out production. And then I would say, like for you, and what you're saying with these commercial freeze dryers like Cudden, in my opinion, you would probably agree is that if you're truly an entrepreneur, you're business savvy, or you're wanting to get in the business, the cost of one of your units or somebody else's is not that's not the biggest hang up. Yes, you have to go get finance. Yes, you have to go get the capital. But if you're truly trying to create a business, it's more, is this unit going to make me money over time to where I then get to profitability, and then it's just creating a cash cow for me.
Right.
And so the only way you're going to get there as a business is getting the best efficient freeze dryer unit that can generate a quality product in the shortest amount of time, so that you can make as much as you want.
Yeah, no, and just to kind of to give you an idea, because we do get asked that question, like, people are asking, what's the ROI on one of these units? And oh gosh, that is a broad question, but going extreme to extreme, depending on your labor, cost of materials, other overheads that you may have, but just justifying a freeze dryer itself, and depending on what that margin on that specific product is going to be, it could be as little as 10 months, or we see about 2 years and 3 months is the payback on one of these pieces of equipment. It doesn't matter what size, because the investment is relative to what you're going to produce. If you have something with extremely high margin, then yeah, you could probably get there between 10 months to a year and 2 months. But we see from about 10 months to about 2 years, 3 months, roughly, and roughly in that neighborhood is the payback. But that is not different than anything else. If you were doing, I'm going back to pet food again. If you're going to have, I want to make extruded pet food. At some point, you need to have a mill. You need to have the blowing, the transfer way. Either you do it by conveyors or you do it by a blowing system. You need to have the extruder. You need to have a dryer, and then you need to have the silo system for packing. That's still millions of dollars in a whole facility. It's not just one piece of equipment. So same thing with people that jump into freeze drying. We had what you're talking about, that at some point you need to make that leap. One of our customers, he looked into it and he goes, well, how much can I get out of this one? And how many pounds can I get out? And as soon as he saw that, he's like, I deal with Costco all day long. I need at least 3 of these to make it worthwhile. He goes, okay, put 3 on the books, and he ordered 3 on the spot. So it was because he was thinking, he was already past that point of figuring it out. He already had a facility. He already had everything that happens on the front end. He just needed something to put it in and get a different SKU out.
Yeah.
But he had already solved that volume problem.
Yeah, and I think sometimes sometimes everyone kind of gets stuck in the head of like what they already see and hear. Like you
Yep.
look at people running home freeze dries and you're like, this seems like way too out there. Like this concept doesn't make any sense to have all these different pieces of equipment like you're mixing, saying like a miller and all that type of stuff. I'm like, well, yeah, but that's what companies who handle food are doing all the
Yep.
time. So
Yep.
in your local or regional area, go into someone who's already has a meat facility. Maybe you could talk to them and say, hey, I understand freeze drying. Why don't we partner up together? I'll run the freeze drying side. You already have the USDA facility, and then all you're doing is maybe buying that 50 kilo Cuddon freeze dryer, and you're helping kind of explore the recipe in there, but you're already in a USDA facility. Then you're understanding what their process is, and it's not that big barrier to entry. Hey, Lloyd, I want to get to some of these questions we're getting in the chat right now. So
Sure.
uh, uh, one person says, "What's the best way to enter the market or introduce freeze dry products into a country or market that doesn't the product doesn't exist?" So let's say let's take pet food, and you want to introduce it into Venezuela, or you want to introduce it into the Virgin Islands, something like that. Like, do you have any advice on how to introduce freeze dried products?
Sure. So we do run into a lot of people that do that. We know some people that are interested in doing this in Ecuador, where freeze drying wasn't that available. It's still kind of new, but they're starting to see, with things like YouTube, TikTok, and just pretty much any other type of video that you see. These small home versions where, like, look, I made candy. Look, I made treats. Look, I made rations. They know about it because it's not hard to hear about it anymore. But going out and finding it in the marketplace is a different thing. So what we're seeing is I've seen, like, in Colombia and Ecuador, people are starting to offer this in trade shows, in local trade shows in those countries, where they say, look, this is a freeze dried product. So it's like, this is, let's say you have a blueberry uh, facility, where, and by facility I mean you're harvesting straight from the plants, you're putting it in baskets, and then that goes off to the store. The little bit that they do as byproduct is going maybe frozen for much less of a premium price. Um, Somebody comes in and offers, look, I've got freeze dried blueberries and freeze dried blueberry powder as an ingredient. People's like, oh, this is great. Where can I get it? And that's where the need comes from. And sometimes these people from the agricultural side are looking for somebody to do the freeze drying for them, because they're not going to jump into it. They're like you said, the specialty is, I already have my operation. I'm not ready to jump into it. I want somebody to do it for me. So the local shows offering, if you want to get into a place that just like I say Colombia and Ecuador because I'm very familiar with those two markets. Mangoes, blueberries, blackberries, bananas, some form of plantains, all the fruits and vegetables you can think of in complete form, snack form, powdered form. So you can go to the confectionery world and say, look, here is strawberry powder, add that to your icing, and that's not strawberry flavor, that's strawberry. It's one ingredient, it's single ingredient, it's not something with strawberry flavor and 10 other chemical ingredients after it that make it taste that way. It's straight what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, we can probably talk about this for hours, but it's,
Oh yeah.
I think you at the beginning you brought up, people may not even be familiar with this, but if you're not, grocery stores typically are handpicking what they think
Yeah.
will look nice to display in their store. So when you go to your Kroger, you go to Costco, you go to those places, like they are not buying fruit that still is good and still is ripe and delicious, but it doesn't look appealing. So
Correct.
there's a company that I get marketed to all the time on social media called Misfits Market, and it's a company that literally sends you all the misfit looking fruits and vegetables that the grocery stores dismiss, but are in the same batch directly from the local farmer or the large farmer. If you look at freeze drying as an application to reduce waste or use that I mean, you could go source that all those misfit produce items from your own local area and have a huge supply of great fruit and vegetables and produce to freeze dry that you can make as a snack. You can make it into a powder, and that way it's more concentrated, and you can put in a little packets, all that type of stuff. Is a huge application, and I'm of the opinion, Lloyd, that government entities will, it may take 10 more years, but government entities will basically incentivize nonprofits uh, to basically do freeze drying to reduce that waste and to help out humanitarianly the food and famines and starvation in the world. Because like if we're throwing away that much waste, there's got to be nonprofits that want to invest in freeze drying to help supply people who are starving in the world.
No, you absolutely can. And there's one thing that you're missing on that is the weight of sending concentrated nutrition, whether it be in bits and pieces or powdered form, is a fraction of what sending the whole fruit, vegetable, or meat would be. So you could drop 100 pounds worth of food via drone somewhere, and it only weighs 10 pounds because of what the freeze dried weight would be. So one, it's concentrated nutrition. Yes, you can also take advantage of reducing waste. These a lot of farms out there. A lot of the stuff goes back into just compost, back into the ground. Just because a tomato looks weird, it didn't look, but nutritionally it's still there. It's still intact. And I'm not talking about stuff that's gone spoiled. I'm just talking about the stuff that looks weird, like
Yeah.
like a double banana, or a tomato that kind of looks like a baseball glove because it grew in a weird way. Nutritionally, that is still there. That could be turned into paste. It could be turned into a salsa. Then there's the shelf life of it. So from getting it to parts of the world that need it, or just taking advantage of something that originally would have been waste and then it goes off as a premium product, it really does turn out to be a win-win all around for the person producing the product, for the person freeze drying it and then selling it, and then then you have another product out there that doesn't normally exist. Uh, like avocado paste, like guacamole, for example. People can make their own salsas at home. They can make it from this ugly fruit, turn it into a tight paste, turn it into a break, freeze dry that, and have portions. They can either consume that with friends and family, or you can make a small business out of it, or you can make it at an industrial level, or find some place where it needs nutrition, or sell it to an armed forces somewhere where it's a nutrition pack, meals.
Yeah. Yeah, we're talking with Lloyd Parks, who represents Cuddon Freeze Dry. It's a large industrial commercial freeze drying company. Been doing freeze drying for 60 years. They're going to be a sponsor. They are a sponsor, and Lloyd's going to be speaking at the Freeze Dried Summit. If you're not familiar with the Freeze Dried Summit, I've got a link in the video description about the conference. So I want to talk about that, Lloyd, right now as we kind of wrap up here. But tell us a little bit about, like, what are you excited for about this Freeze Dried Summit and coming here? And then maybe give us a little teaser on what you're going to speak on during one of the breakout sessions.
Well, this is the first summit I'm going to go to of its kind, so I'm kind of excited to see what people are thinking about doing freeze drying, because it's usually the smaller people starting up that have some sort of new idea, and they're coming to the table because they see a need that's not being filled somewhere. So I always like, from my R&D side of things, I always like hearing what people have in mind, and they're like, yeah, I can see that happening, or I don't see how somebody's going to do that, but I want to see how they're thinking about it. So getting all those new ideas is going to be refreshing for me. From my side of things, going to be talking about a couple things. The main one is that people always ask me about is a kill step or a reduction step possible inside of a freeze dryer? And I've done a study over the past 3 years, 3 validations, and I'll explain what the progression steps were from the first one all the way to the third. We did that with the help of a microbiologist in New Zealand, and we got some pretty interesting results where we did get some good log reduction, close to 7 log reduction for salmonella
Wow.
and listeria. So I can, I'll have that presentation up, and if anybody has specific questions about how we did the inoculation and all that, happy to answer that. But in a nutshell, it's all there. The other part of that is heat in the absence of moisture versus heat in the presence of moisture. I'll get a little bit into that, and how regulation focuses on heat in the presence of moisture, because everybody knows what cooking is, and oh yeah, I reached a kill step, I reached this temperature. In the absence of moisture, which is freeze drying, um, things happen differently, and under vacuum things happen a little bit differently too. So that's part of what those charts are. And the other part I'll touch on a little bit once we get through that presentation is how the look of a product based on how aggressive a recipe is. I can freeze dry strawberries, really aggressively and make them shrivel up a bit, and they almost look dehydrated. They'll still be better than dehydrated, but they'll look that way. Or I can make it look like a fresh piece of strawberry if I'm, more delicate with a recipe. There's freeze drying, and then there's freeze drying as far as quality, and it really depends on what your product is. So what you want to do, it's possible, and how you program that.
Yeah, I like that last part because I tell people too, it's like what's possible with freeze dry. I'm like, you know, people think about these different categories of existing freeze dried products, but think about it too, like taste matters. Think about all of our different senses. Like, does whatever you're freeze drying look appealing? Because people want to buy things that look delicious,
Yep.
look tasteful. People also want to be able to feel things. Like, does it look like something I would want to snack on, or look like I'm snacking on from other people, right?
Yep.
um, Most freeze dried meals, like a beef stroganoff meal, it looks disgusting, right? But it probably tastes great. How can you make your beef stroganoff, meal that's rehydrated? How can you make it look appealing? How can you separate the two ingredients so that when someone opens the bag, they do think that it like this is what basically they started with originally. So there's all these different, I feel like, mechanisms that as a entrepreneur, you can think through instead of just thinking, I'm just going to freeze dry a strawberry and it's going to be the same as everybody else.
Yeah, what I'll try to do also is, now that you bring that, I've been talking to some of my colleagues in the New Zealand side of things, is for this and shows, but for this summit, I'll probably bring some samples with me of some things that I've freeze dried on my new lab. Like I said, I just opened the lab like about 8 days ago, so I'm just now starting to fine tune that little piece of equipment. But you're right, you want a product to look appealing, and I'll bring some samples of what's possible, what something looks like, and what an aggressive formula looks like versus a delicate one. But there's certainly a lot of things. One of the coolest things I've done is I did make a New York strip in a freeze dryer raw, and I rehydrated it after about a week. It rehydrated no different than what the steak looked like. Threw it on a grill, couldn't tell the difference. And I am a carnivore, true and through. So what you can do with it really depends on how you treat it. A lot of it has to do with what happens on the front end as well. And in freeze drying, what goes into the freeze dryer makes a big difference to what comes at the end. The recipe's part of it, but what goes in makes a big difference.
I want to get to some of the one more person who's been chatting quite a bit. He Mechanics and Carpentry, that's their username. He says these units seem to be sized based on condenser capacity, how much water vapor it can freeze dry. He says he's on kind of a learning curve on how these freeze dryers are designed versus like home freeze dryers. So anyway, can you give any kind of like feedback on that?
So yes, so particularly ours and some of the other larger commercial units, they will go with what their ice condenser capacity, what the ice trap capacity is. The best example I can give on that, let's say you buy a Cudden unit, an 1800 unit, the largest one, and that 1800 means that our ice bank can sublimate, can pull 1800 kilos of water from whatever product you're putting in there. You can fit as much product that will physically fit on those trays, and you're not going to exceed that capacity of how much water is going to be extracted from it. And what we do for a test when we hand over one of these equipment is, let's say, again, going back to the example of an 1800, we will fill that freeze dryer, all the trays, with 1800 kilos of water, so close to 4,000 pounds of water, freeze it in place, turn it on, basically press play, and at the end of the cycle, which is about 18 hours in this case, all that water will be gone. It'll be all on the ice trap, and the only thing that's going to be left behind in those trays is whatever mineral was in that water. So if you have heavy water, you'll end up with like salty, silty type stuff left in the trays. How much you can fit on the trays is very product dependent. And if you know what your product is and you know what size, or if you're going to do it, slurries are the easiest to calculate, because that's going to be, if it's 1800, you could probably put about 2000 in there, because you're not going to exceed, nothing's more wet than water. So it can handle 1800 kilos of water. If you have something with 5% solids, you're still going to be able to put 1800 in there. If you're putting bits and pieces on there, one thing I do want to point out, and this doesn't matter if it's a small unit like a Harvest Right or an 1800 like ours, every space in between bits and pieces is wasted space. So if you have a whole bunch of circles and those tiny little spaces empty between them, that's wasted space. And because the processes are long, you really don't, you want to maximize the use of the freeze dryer. The other thing you can look at as far as capacity to answer this question is, what is the usable shelf space of a freeze dryer? And that's also combined with how much the ice bank can take. So as long as you're not exceeding what the ice bank capacity is, and ours is designed not to, you can have, let's say you have 20 square meters, or 20 square feet, just to give you a number. That you have 20 square feet that you can put slices or bits and pieces on. And the best way to find out the capacity of what your product is get one tray, or the dimensions of one tray of whatever freeze dryer you're using, regardless of brand, and then you see how much product you can fit on it, weigh it, and multiply that by the number of trays. That is a very close ballpark to where you'll be and what your actual numbers are going to be.
Yeah, it's getting like more and more technical, as you
It
go
does.
forward. But basically, a freeze drying company like Cudden is going to say, "Hey, this is what we've tested, or we know basically can fit in here." There's going to be experimentation. I know that, like, it's nice to say that a freeze dryer, like for example, these home units, they'll say it can do up to 20 pounds. Well, in order for you to get a consistent production flow of, what you're putting in so that you can kind of forecast how much you're actually able to generate, you kind of have to figure out your sweet spot of like, well, realistically, I can do 3 pounds per tray. There's 5 trays in it. So I can literally do about 15 pounds, and it generally takes me about 24 to 30 hours to do 15 pounds. If I load it up to 20 pounds, I get all this variability in how long it takes, and you
Correct.
see a ton of ice build up. So yeah, again, we can run around in circles on this, talk a lot. Um, but Lloyd, hey, thanks for hopping on here. We kind of went a little bit longer than what we had allocated, but I think it was great information. And again, Lloyd's going to be talking at the Freeze Dried Summit, the inaugural one here in a couple of weeks here in Boise, Idaho, and we will have a recording of all of our sessions and topics. And so if you're not able to attend the Freeze Dried Summit, we'll have that recorded. You can at least glean from it in audio. We'll hopefully have some video format. And also, if you want to connect with Lloyd, you can find him on LinkedIn, message him. You can also find him on, I've got a link in the video description to cuddenfreezedry.com as well. Lloyd, anything you want to close with?
No, just looking forward to it. This is coming up in just a few weeks, so yeah, looking forward to hearing what everybody's bringing to the table there, and be cool to do.
Awesome. Okay.